And that is, if you are booked for any purpose, whether it be for drunk driving, whether it's public intoxication, whether it's possession of less than an ounce of marijuana, the fact that you were actually booked, that you were taken to the station, a photograph was taken, the moment that that transaction is finished, that information is transmitted to the Department of Justice in California, and it will be there until you seal your record. And in many cases, it can still be accessed. So, if you plan on applying to college or applying for a job in the future, it's something to consider, because I can tell you all of the college applications ask you if you've ever been placed on probation, if you've been convicted of a misdemeanor or felony. It can impact your federal and state financial aid packages. So even though you may go to juvenile traffic court and the ticket may be disposed of in a way that you felt was fair and didn't carry a lot of serious consequences, remember that these things, when they happen, especially now in the age of the internet, there's tremendous amounts of information out there, and it doesn't go away unless you affirmatively remove it. In many cases, you can't do that. Well, there's a form. There's certain offenses that you cannot seal. So if you were convicted of a robbery as a juvenile, or an assault with a deadly weapon, those are kind of classic offenses that will not be able to be sealed. But anything else pretty much can be sealed, and you just have to go down to court, file a motion. There's a paper that everyone has, and you can submit it, and it takes about 6 months.
That's also what I was going to say. As a person who's had to have things sealed off my record, I know you guys hear a lot of your friends and stuff say, "Oh, I'm a minor, so I get in trouble. It's not that big of a deal." There are certain crimes that cannot be sealed, but not only just sealed. If you can, even as a minor, you can get things expunged off your record after a certain amount of time, which means it will no longer be on there. But understand this: all of these procedures cost money. All of this costs money. So it's not you just walk in, fill out a form, and then your record's sealed, nobody ever finds about it. They want you to give them money to do everything. So the more charges you have, and the more things need to be sealed, the more your butt better be saved and pay for that. It does cost you money to get that stuff sealed.
So, yes.
I'm sorry, could I just follow up that? That was my question. The reason I brought it up is because I wanted the young people here to know that that is a possibility. But I also think, maybe it comes better from you if we can explain what it means to be sealed, so that when you do check you are trying to get a job and it says, have you ever been arrested or convicted? If you have something sealed, you can in fact say no. And I think I've stated the law correctly, but just in case.
Yes, if it's been sealed or expunged, you have the legal right to say, no, you have not been convicted of that particular crime.
But with some exceptions.
Yeah.
But the NSA, as we all know, is listening to this conversation right now, right? So
Any law enforcement job application, any job application that requires any kind of security clearance, they will know. And what typically happens, and it's kind of tragic for kids who end up going to the military, is that they are very comfortable with the declaration that you just made, given what they know and their understanding of the law. And it's perfectly fine at the very initial stages of their career in the military, but typically they move up in the military and they get to the point where they require a security clearance, and all of a sudden they haven't disclosed to the Army or the Navy or the Air Force this former offense, and now it's really bad for their career. Yes, absolutely. And it also depends on who's asking and how the question is asked. So if an application says, were you ever arrested? Well, if the arrest record may or may not have been sealed, right? Were you ever convicted? That might be sealed. It probably will be if you make the effort to do it. But it depends on the language of the application. And I have to say, sadly, that employers are getting more and more sophisticated in how they get to the question, because they know that the juvenile court system is designed and uses language specifically to avoid the accountability after they turn 18. But now employers are getting wise because they want to get to it.
I just had a couple comments. I think you need to draw a line between sealing of juvenile cases versus expunging adult cases, and they're treated differently, and they have different implications, and we're kind of going back and forth using the same language on both. Sealing of a juvenile record occurs once someone turns 18, and I think after they've been off of probation for
6 months.
6 months. Kind's probably much more up to date on the details than I am, but if you get a record sealed as a juvenile, and except for a few crimes, enumerated crimes, you can get a juvenile record sealed, and then afterwards you can say that you know, essentially that case didn't exist. But as Kind was saying, you know, with the internet, we don't know what goes out there. And I've had things that have gone out on the internet for clients that they were just wrong. But who do you talk to? I mean, whose door do you knock on and say, somebody put a posting out on the internet and it's incorrect? So, you know, you have problems with that. And then it's a different story when you're an adult. There is no sealing of criminal adult records. You can expunge them, but if you expunge a criminal conviction, it's not expunged for all purposes. It's for job applications it is, but then if you are applying for any kind of a public certification or a license or something, you have to disclose it. So it's not a simple one-size-fits-all answer to all issues.
And you would be surprised, the types of jobs that would require licenses. I mean, you probably aren't surprised if you think about it, but those licensing boards have access to records, both adult and juvenile, and they don't necessarily draw a distinction between whether something happened in juvenile was not necessarily a conviction, it was called something else. So cosmetology, financial planning, accountants, carpenters, daycare providers, all of those things appear. And yes?
Were you finished?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, just two things. If you are a juvenile and you can have your record sealed after 5 years if you're under 18. The age that children are being placed on probation is getting younger and younger. And so if you're 12 years old and you've been placed on probation, once you're terminated, it's 5 years after that. You can't have any arrest or, you know, get into any more trouble. And like you said, when you're that was you. You said when you're 18, they can have the record sealed. And then also, as Steve pointed out with the language, juveniles are not convicted. They are adjudicated. So when you are filling out an application and they ask, have you ever been convicted? Juveniles can answer no, they have not been convicted. That's just for adults. But if they ask, have you ever been arrested? That's something different.
But there are crimes that you can be convicted of as a juvenile that you can't be convicted of.
Well, that's only if you're going to be found unfit for juvenile court.
Exactly.
On a very serious crime. You know, you're 17 and you commit an armed robbery, you're going to go to adult court, and, you know, if you're guilty, hopefully it's only if you're guilty, you'll be convicted, and then it'll be a conviction, but it'll be an adult conviction. It won't be a juvenile
That's
conviction.
what I'm saying. Like, that's what I'm saying. There's a misconception out amongst young people that even something as serious as an armed robbery, kids think that the only way you can get charged as an adult is if you kill somebody. That is simply not the case. There are plenty of violent crimes out there that you can commit as a juvenile that you will be tried and found and convicted as an adult. So don't think just because you're a juvenile that's going to fit everything you do. There's a lot of seriousness out there that these kids get into nowadays, and these juvenile courts are putting them right up there with the Supreme Court and Superior Courts.
And you can be
I have a question I think it's for Tanisha. So Young Angels has 2 teams of kids, one in the Palisades and one in Watts. And Kind was talking about the dings on the record and how disastrous that can be if you're applying to college or getting a job later on in life. It seems that the kids on our Palisades team have more of a safety net and more resources to help them if they do stumble and fall, to make sure that that isn't going to show up. But the kids on our Watts team don't seem to have those resources, and a lot of times they're, well, pretty much all the kids that we've talked to have had some sort of an exposure to law enforcement, and there's some little dingy things like truancy and where you just happen to brush by the system and all of a sudden you're in it. And Are there resources that you could offer to those kids that don't have the sort of safety net that the kids in the Palisades have?
There are a lot of community-based organizations who are out there just for those purposes. They have after-school programs. They have opportunities for the kids to do community service. A lot of times when you're looking at, I guess, lightweight offenses, you know, maybe tagging or something like that, a young person may be given community service and they may not actually file the petition. We have informal probation, and then you have formal probation. But when you go to appear before the judge, guess what? They're bringing in your grades. They're looking at what kind of student you are, what kind of young person you are at home, and that weighs heavily when the judge is making a decision whether or not to give this individual community service, or do they require more intervention and maybe formal probation where they have to report to a probation officer.
So there's also a number of different organizations that specifically help youth seal their records. And I think Greg Boyle at Homeboy Industry, they have a facet of their organization that does that. Also Public Counsel in downtown Los Angeles does that. And the inquiry for that as to whether or not you get your record sealed has less to do about academic performance and more to do about whether or not you completed probation successfully. So it's a lot lower standard.